We live in an age of shouting, but at our best, Americans argue out our differences, pushing ourselves compromise by compromise to a better place. That's why at NorCal News Now, we believe in a different kind of political talk show. On NorCal News Now, we welcome activists and opinion leaders, office holders, and candidates from local city council members to top statewide and nationwide office seekers. We talk to them like they're humans, and we expect them to leave their talking points at the door and talk to us and our audience like we're humans too. We believe in unvarnished, in-depth, wide-ranging discussions on a whole host of different topics. Handmade in Northern California, our show is not actually handmade. We make it with professional cameras and microphones like every other broadcast show. We are, after all, not cave people. You can find NorCal News Now on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, our website, on your favorite podcast feed, and on ancient communication technologies like smoke signals and television, but not smoke signals. I think by this point you can see we're a little bit different. So give us a shot. NorCal News Now, a political talk show at the intersection of politics and real life. This episode of NorCal News Now is sponsored by the Butte Glen Central Labor Council, promoting social justice for working people in our community.
On this episode of NorCal News Now, we're chatting with California State Senate candidate Silke Pflueger. I'm your host, Mike Richman.
And I'm Aaron Haar.
You are?
Yes.
How are you, man?
Good.
Yeah, we're back off hiatus.
Former campaign consultant, but don't maybe not really read that. Now I'm just a change agent.
You're a change agent.
In the community.
You're a Michael Cohen watcher.
Yes. I watched all 11 hours of the Michael Cohen hearings, Riveting. It's like The Godfather Part 4, I think.
Yeah, that's a good call. We've been on hiatus for a while, so a lot been going on since we were on last in November, I think.
Quite a bit, yeah. Not much, yeah. But we'll quite a bit. Quite a bit. We took a little break. Of course, we too weren't saved from the fire.
Yeah,
Chris lost his home in the fire, and we wanted to take some time to, step away from politics and help the community and get things right. And
we talked to Jody Jones on the show.
Jody Jones on, and of course, Chris has been working on covering footage up there and stuff. So, but now, the things are getting heated back up. We have, like we said, when we had our candidate. When we had the election night coverage, we said it'll only be a few weeks before presidential candidates start coming out. They have, and wow, it's the juicy chapters, I guess. Yeah,
it's on.
Yeah,
it's on. It's late.
I'm really excited to have our guest here today.
Yeah, that's right. Let's get to that because that's a good guest we have on the show today. Today's guest is running in a competitive primary in a special election for the vacant seat in California's 1st State Senate District. She's an engineer, an immigrant, a breast cancer survivor, and one of the founders of the Tahoe Truckee Indivisible chapter. So, Silke Pflueger, welcome to NorCal News Now.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. It's a great honor. And by the way, it's Silke.
Silke. Did I say Silke?
You said Silky, and I'm not Silky.
Silke.
Yes.
Silke.
Perfect.
Got it. Okay.
But it's okay if you vote for me. You can call me Silky.
whatever works. Just press the lever for the right person. That's right.
Exactly.
Right. Great.
Excited to get to know you. There's been a lot of support and a lot of fervor in the district around you and your run, and definitely you've gotten to be popular. I guess that's not a Southern California accent I'm hearing. So tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and kind of your story about how you got here, because it is one that's very interesting as far as people running for state senate. We don't have a lot of people that are, well, they're all American citizens. However, none of them have some of the background that you have, and I think it's really interesting. So yeah, tell us about where.
Sure. Yeah. So you don't think that's a Truckee accent?
I just didn't know if that was,
No?
Eastern
Okay.
Oregon.
Okay. So it's German. So I came here in 1994 because I did an internship in Connecticut with United Technologies a long time ago. That was prerequisite for my engineering studies. The internship was not the Connecticut thing. I fell in love with America, and I really wanted to come back. So I finished my PhD in Germany, and the place where I did my PhD started opening US dependencies, and so I was the second person of the company to go to the US, and I ended up in Michigan. I bought a 5-liter Mustang convertible, which was not really a good car for Michigan winters, but it was, the American dream. I lived the American dream. And so I was there for 3 years, and then I couldn't deal with the winters anymore. And I drove my Mustang out here, and I was in Silicon Valley for a number of years. I worked for a startup, small company, let's put it that way. We got big during the telecom boom. We went on to be part of the largest tech merger at that time. And we then went to 30,000 people after the merger, and then 3 years later we were at 4,000 people, and it was like, okay, it's time to leave the crazy corporate world. So what I did then for 12 years, I think, was to work with European companies and establish them in the US, and I did that very successfully. I was responsible for payroll, I was responsible for getting health insurance, but I was also responsible just to get the companies up and running. And so by the time they reached a certain size and it felt corporate again, I would usually say, okay, it's enough, and I would find the next company I could do that for. So I have an engineering background, which really brings me the looking at details and the scientific foundations of things, but I also have the business person background that looks at how can we survive and how are we going to make the next quarter and what does it take to get this company going. And then I had breast cancer, and I decided to take it a little slower, and because it's interesting when you're confronted with your mortality. So I was lucky enough to say I'll take a timeout, and somehow that timeout became starting Tahoe, Truckee Indivisible, and eventually for this run for Senate.
And what was it about the campaign that 2 years ago that really got you going with that? What was it that you saw that 3 years ago? I mean, that really made you say, I want to jump in there and begin to organize and take the experience I have and bring it into the political realm, because I assume you'd never really been in the
to me, politics was always a spectator sport, not a hand-to-hand combat that it's now. So to me, it was really worrying to see that sentiment against immigrants, against people of color, to see the focus on, how can we lower taxes for companies, but I mean, in fact, for pretty much most of us in California, that big tax cut ended up with higher tax bills. I don't know. I just did my taxes, and it's looking not good. So I just really wanted to stand up for the people, for our values, and that's also what led me to run for Congress, because I think what's really important is to stand for everyday people and not for, corporations, not for companies, whether they're insurance companies or oil companies or who knows what. It's important to stand for the people in the district.
And talk about that. Talk about the district, the composition of the district a little bit. I mean, what the geographic composition of the district is, what the boundaries of it are, and who is in that district.
Yeah, so it's one of the largest districts in California in terms of area. All California Senate districts have just shy of 1 million people because we have 40 senators. We have 39 million people living in the state. It's ginormous. It starts up in Siskiyou County. It goes along the Oregon border, then comes down the Sierra, excludes Butte County, and goes to south of Lake Tahoe all the way to every single inhabitant of Alpine County, all 1,250 of them. But it also has a large area in the Sacramento suburbs. So it's all of El Dorado County. It has Folsom in it, Orangevale, and then 57% of Plaza County. So Rocklin, Loomis, Auburn, and then all of Nevada County. So it's big, yeah. And it has very different, it's almost like running a few different campaigns because the people in the Sacramento suburbs have a very different view on things than the people in Redding have, than the people in Siskiyou County have. Even between Redding and Siskiyou County, there's huge differences. But what it brings pretty much everybody together is we have to improve on fire resiliency, and we have to have better health care, and we need to improve the jobs picture, though that's probably a little bit more important in the rural areas, because the rural areas and the North State, they're bleeding kids. So that's, it's water, and kids are their biggest exports.
We were talking before the show started. We were just kind of chatting a little bit about kind of the makeup of the district in terms of the political makeup of the district, the Republican versus Democrat versus NPP, and the smaller parties as well that are mixed in there. And it's a rather daunting. You're one of 5 people running. The other 4 are all to the right of you. Are they all Republicans, or
they are all Republicans?
So yes, you're the one Democrat. And just so we clarify for everyone out there watching, this is a primary. So what's going to happen is the 5 of you will run on March 26th, I think is the date. And 2 of you will emerge. The 2 top vote getters will emerge on June 6th, is it?
June 4th.
June 4th. In the
Tuesday.
General. Okay, Tuesday, right. But if you get 50%, or anyone gets 50% on March 26th, that's the election's over.
Yes.
So this is an important vote to get out.
Yes.
And as we talked about again before the show, the makeup of the district is leaning more Republican. So how do you deal with that and talk to people that are not maybe naturally gravitating towards a more liberal viewpoint?
Sure, yeah. The makeup of the district is horrible, and people ask me, horrible for Democrats. It's 48% Republicans, 28% Democrats, and the rest is NPP and small parties. But that really doesn't mean that I can't change the topic and I can't make change in general, because I think what we're seeing now and what we've seen in the last years is that we didn't really have good representation, because people are like, why do we need another Democrat? So the Republicans are saying, we are not ever going to make it because this is red rural country. The Democrats are saying, why do we need another Democrat in the state Senate? Because we already have a supermajority. And I think that is exactly the point. We need rural Democrats, because the Republicans, I think, they're, if you look at the last years, even if they say they're reaching across the aisle, they're shut out of government. They can reach across the aisle, but in the end, they still vote against the stuff that's important for people. And so what I can bring is that I will sit in committees, and I will have people that I can talk to on my side of the aisle about issues that are important for rural California. So it's a bit of a federal issue, but a lot of people have talked to me up in Truckee and also up in the Sierras in general about this proposed legislation to have snowmobiles go out in national forests, and there's been a lot of resistance from the environmental movement. And I think I see both sides, I see the need. I love going out in nature, and I want it quiet, and I'm a backcountry skier, and I sometimes it's like, oh, these damn snowmobiles. But I also see the other side. Not only is it a huge economic gain for the area because people come up to go snowmobile, so they bring in tourism dollars, they rent stuff, they stay there. But it's also about representing everybody in the district, not just the liberals on the spectrum. So I think in that term I can bring coming across and reaching out to those on the other side of the spectrum and helping them from within the leading party. So
I think it's a great point, and I've certainly noticed it since I've been here 17 years, it's just a no vote. The Republican leadership up here is just getting paid to just be a no vote. And the discussion, what's missing out of some of those things is the discussion and really the representation of 30 to 45% of the district of, hey, we're here too. And even though we're, a huge minority, we still have a voice and we still deserve the representation.
Well, it's an odd thing.
So that's a great thing too, is because as a rural Democrat, I also see the Democratic Party as the same way of to say, hey, we're up here and we're people too. And we want to help our neighbors with recreation and fishing and angling, and I certainly hear that on the fisherman side and fishing. The people who generally take into that recreation is, yes, we want to save the salmon, we want fish in our creeks. We don't want to just have these programs go away, but at the same respect, we would like to be able to use these areas and take advantage of this great recreation we have out here. So it is tough, huh? A rural Democrat is a tough place to be because, so many things get lost in the big cities. And I think that's where the fervor is. If we could get past it and see that, well, yeah, that's why we're frustrated up here is because, a lot of these things end up going to big city ideas and we kind of get left in the cold. And it's a great point. And there's something I kind of see here. I mean, you're a popular candidate. You are the only women running in the field out of 5 men. And it's very starking, to see it up there in the forum and especially your answers and what kind of leadership it would be. Do you think there's a possible way that you could come in and steal it with that many people flooding the Republican vote?
Well, we'll see. I mean, at this point, especially in the primary, it's all about getting out the vote. And that's what we're really concentrating on right now. And so we're text banking, we're phone banking, we're knocking on doors. We've unleashed the masses to write postcards. And I'm unbelievably thankful for everybody that's helping me to get out my name. And it's been a very humbling experience to see the support I'm getting. And yes, a lot of the support is coming from women. It's, you see men in all these forums, but a lot of the support is coming from women, and that's very encouraging.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because we just celebrated International Women's Day. And, did a little reading up on that. That was actually, I don't want to, throw a trigger word in, but it was actually a Marxist socialism.
With the early part of the 20th century in the U.S.
It was actually a German woman who decided that she was wanted. It was in 1910. She wanted voting rights. For women. She wanted better health care. She wanted better job opportunities. She wanted training, training in different jobs. And they started this women march, and 8 years later, it became Austria, Sweden, but France, a bunch of other
European
countries brought it.
countries, yeah.
And it wasn't until 1975 that it was recognized by the United Nations. But however, in 1918, 10 years later, women got the right to vote in
1920
in Germany. So
Germany,
and so it did create a movement, and it did get some things done as far as giving women rights in Germany. But in celebrating International Women's Day, in honor of that holiday, who's some women you admire? What? I mean, who's a woman that you admire on International Women's Day?
So very interesting. Probably 8 years ago, I was the first woman chair of my industry. Of my industry's big conference. So they put a big conference on every year. They have done it for 40 years. And I was the first woman ever to lead it. And leading up to my opening little talk, I decided to research, what women were in the STEM field. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And I stumbled across a name I had never heard before, and that was Margaret Hamilton. And she was actually the woman that made sure that Apollo 11 landed on the moon. She created all the she led the team that created the software for the Apollo program. She's the one that coined the phrase software engineering. Before that, they just said, oh, it's just this, programming thing. And so to me, she's a real hero. I also listened to an interview of her, and she was like, yeah, my husband's this Harvard lawyer, and when we went out, they wanted me to be with the women and talk about kids, and I really wanted to be with the guys and talk about, their stuff. And that just reflects me, because I remember being at parties where I'm like, can I just hang out with you guys, because I want to talk about lasers. So to me, she's a I think she's great. She's a woman that I really thoroughly admire. There were also the mathematicians at NASA, and I think they got very well recognized in a movie that was put out just a few years ago. And yes, it's so sad that, you watch all these, Apollo 13 and whatever, and all the women do is sit at home in their dresses and kind of hope their guys come back home. Whereas there were so many women that were involved in it in crucial roles, and I really admire that.
Let me ask you this, because it's, as I hear you talk about that, what I think about is this idea that we're still in this country, and maybe you can speak to it maybe in Europe differently, but in this country we're still stuck, I think, in gender roles. I mean, we still look at it, we say, well, everybody's equal, we think that, but we still have this perspective that, well, women have certain skill set, men have certain skill sets, and maybe, there's certain things that women should do, certain things that men should do. I mean, I've experienced this in my career, that I've been managed by men as well as women, and there definitely is a difference in the attitude. And I think maybe sometimes we take it too far to try to make everything gender neutral. Maybe those of us on the left say, well, everybody should be equal. But there are some differences. And I mean, in terms of government, I think that women do bring a lot to government in a different way than men do. A little more subtlety maybe in dealing with some issues rather than just the brute force method. So do you find that that's something that you feel comfortable talking about, or do you feel like you want to maybe make it more gender neutral? So
let me start with Germany. One of the reasons I liked it over here so much when I first came was that nobody was like, oh, you're a woman, you can't do this. Right. Because I remember I was sharing an office with 4 people or 5 people, and we would get phone calls, and I would pick up, and the guy on the other end would be like, oh, I have a technical question, can you connect me to somebody who can help me? And I would say, I have a PhD in mechanical engineering. I kind of think I can help you. So, and that has not happened to me in the US. So I think the US, and I can really only compare to Germany in the early 90s or late 80s, because I've been here for so long. So I think the US in that sense is so much better than Germany was at that time. That being said, there are there's research that is available that looks at performance of companies that have a larger amount of women in the executive team, and they tend to perform better. And I think I don't want to say that women are better, it's just the balance has to be there.
Right.
So, and I think if you look at all sides, and if you get everybody's input, that's going to lead to better performance. And the company that I talked about before, where I worked in Silicon Valley, I was actually dismayed because really the only women in the company were admins and HR and me. But the engineering teams were all guys, and it wasn't difficult for me because I've worked with guys my entire life. But I thought it was really sad that we didn't really focus on getting more women in, also on the engineering and technical sides. So
that segues nicely in my next question. I mean, women have made relative gains in the recent decades, and especially since that first International Women's Day. In politics as well as industry, but these advances largely remain the exception. For example, women currently occupy less than 2% of all banking CEO positions and less than 20% of board seats worldwide, according to new data from the International Monetary Fund. How can financial institutions and businesses in general introduce more diversity to their boards and their senior leadership roles? Because we absolutely see the difference, and in just one section you can see not only with the state houses in California, but also with CEO positions, as companies are becoming more comfortable having women leadership because of harassment and because of because men have trouble well, and I mean, and it's a to them, I've read it. It is to the boards a liability issue as well as a diversity issue.
But let me just counter that a little bit. I mean, it increasingly, as women are entering into the upper echelons of the business world as well as politics, we're seeing that there are some women who have some issues with harassment as well. I mean, and it does tend to be a gender issue, I think. I'm not defending men, certainly not defending harassers at all, but it does tend to be a gender issue. But I mean, we've seen, like, for instance, Amy Klobuchar right now is getting a lot of heat from people in her presidential campaign, her fledgling presidential campaign, that she is abusive. She's been abusive to staff, and this has come out as become something that's been a problem for her to deal with. So it's not just men.
Well, I can speak to the organization I'm with, the Democratic Party, who we, lost our chair for that we elected on a marginal vote between him and a woman, and not even a year and a half, 2 years later, we're having sexual harassment claims and having to have a special election and do these different things. And I think it goes to your point of men lead differently than women.
They do. Yeah.
And I'm sorry that if we have some issues in our own camp, but we obviously do in the last 2 years of the Me Too movement. And I think organizations have taken notice and now are taking measures to say, well, I think we want to go this way now to have some protections. And of course the diversity is a much bigger part of that. But back to the question to you. I mean, how do you get over that? Because even Germany has this issue. I think there's 24% of America has female on boards. I think it's lower in Germany and across Europe, hovering right around 20%. But there's just been this notion that we can't, even from a female CEO, that women can't be in the banking positions. But it seems as though there is some criticism from male leadership in saying you've failed at managing the financial infrastructure of these banks.
Yeah, so perhaps I can circle back to politics. First off, I knocked on doors before the midterms in in Reno for Indivisible over there, and I'm extremely elated that Nevada has elected the first legislature that is majority women. And I think it's huge. It's huge on so many fronts, not just that Nevada, which used to be a very red state, turned purple, but also that women really have come out in force and said, we need to stand up for our values. And then on the Amy Klobuchar issue, if a guy had done the same thing, nobody would talk about it. And that's just so infuriating. I'm not taking any positions here. It's just that, if guys do that, who cares, because that's how they work. And now it's a woman that's running for president. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, she's not good with her people.
Well, and I wasn't criticizing or taking a position either. I was just simply saying that I think that element of being maybe short-tempered, being a little angry sometimes is a function maybe more of the leadership position, not gender as much. Maybe. I don't know.
I see it as high-profile female candidates are more scrutinized than high-profile male candidates. And I mean, the current chief executive not included, but obviously, there's some women. I mean, we saw it with other female candidates, Hillary especially.
Do you remember Hillary shed like one tear in the primaries in 2008, and it was this ginormous, exactly. And then Michael Cohen, he's between not Michael Cohen, not Michael Cohen. The Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. He's like between tears and screaming, and everybody's like, "Oh, what a great guy he is!"
It was crazy to see Michael Cohen give a more measured testimony under Congress than our new Supreme Court person.
Anyway, we got away. So how do we get more women in leadership? So I always said I don't want to have a job because I'm a woman, but I also do not want to be skipped over because I'm a woman. And I know that happened in my career. There was one guy that got promoted ahead of me because he was playing poker with the VP. And so, there's structural discrimination in companies. And we need to get over that at some point. We also just really need to support women by not putting all the child rearing load on them. So in a lot of European countries now, there is you can take time off, parental leave, and that's both for guys and for women. So it's perfectly good. The companies I was working with in Europe, guys would take a half year off because they had a child and they were doing their part of raising the child. And if it's just the women that do it, they automatically will become discriminated against. Because I had questions like, you are, 26 or whatever before I left to come here. You're 26. What are your plans with family? And are you going to be out, for a year or two to raise your children? And so, of course, if I'm a small business owner, I'm not going to take that risk, right? And so it's the same here. As long as it's still the mom that goes home when the kid has fever, as long as it's still the mom that does all the cleaning after her job, that's a problem. And so we need to fix that by supporting equal, being equal in terms of having guys being involved in the family instead of just being, he's the breadwinner, she's the one that raises the kids.
Well, it's important, and just to go back real quick, I mean, when we talked about those banking CEOs, there's incredible discrimination in the banking industry, not only with minority, but with women. They get less loans, they get approved for less business things. That's true. And I mean, a portion of that is from the leadership. Many female candidates will say, listen, don't vote for me because I'm a woman, vote for me because I'm the best candidate and I'm most qualified for the office. But some have said if it was Lehman if it wasn't Lehman Brothers and it was actually Lehman Sisters, there wouldn't have been a financial crash. They argue that if the banking industry would have been more diverse, that there wouldn't have been a financial crash. And there's an argument there that gender diversity strengthens and helps protect complex systems. Do you feel the same way, and not only about the banking structure, but the state house and how it represents itself? I mean, we're in supposedly the most progressive state, and you talk about things like family leave, you talk about things like that, where there aren't a whole lot of protections out there in a right to work state?
Yeah, right to work.
Yeah, so
Well, we're not a right to
we're
work
not a right
state,
to work
thank
state, but
God.
we're at will in an at will state that have some issues with, still a makeup of a state house that is primarily led by men, and especially up here in the North State.
Yeah, I was actually astonished. I was like, when I heard that Nevada had the first, woman majority legislature, I was like, California needs to be, they're probably up there, right? So I counted how many women senators we have, and we have 14 of 40, which isn't terrible, but it isn't very good either.
Not representative of our statistics.
Exactly, yes. And so I wouldn't say don't vote for me because I'm a woman. I would say vote for me because I'm the best candidate, because I actually listen to what you want. And I'm the best candidate because I'm standing for stuff that's important to people. And I don't, one of the things, I don't take corporate PAC money. I look at my Republican competitors, and they don't take PAC money. At least I didn't see that. But they take money from Purdue Pharma. They take money from PG&E. They take money from insurances, and so that to me is really worrying. What I want to be is I want to be the candidate that runs for the people, and that actually brings us to a whole different thing that we didn't necessarily want to touch on, but it's campaign finance reform. So lots of people were saying, why don't you have a candidate statement in your voter guide, in our voter guide? And there's a very simple reason for that. It was $14,039 to put the voter statement in. And it was due 2 weeks after I decided to run, 1 week after the election was called. I don't know how many of you have raised money. Raising $14,000 in 2 weeks is pretty much impossible. So especially when you're just starting up. So that's a huge issue. And so that's something I will fight for, that we don't have the companies buy people to run for them. And it's also, I had a great life before this. I'm not doing this for my career. I am doing this for the people in the district. I am, if I don't win, somebody was like, oh, if you don't win, don't worry, you'll get a job in Sacramento. I don't need a job in Sacramento. I had a beautiful life. I love what I'm doing now. And I think it's really important that we get people elected that do this because they listen and because they care for the people in the area.
I'm glad you brought up campaign finance reform because I thought about this issue a lot, and Citizens United, which was a Supreme Court decision, which was kind of changed this whole game. I think it was in 2010. So it's been almost a decade now that we've been living with this. I've always thought of this as being more of a the Citizens United decision, the dark money benefits more the conservative platform and benefits more the conservatives. But I think big money Democrats as well are really enriched themselves with this dark money. So it kind of hits both sides of the political spectrum. But people like yourselves who are really citizens first, you're not a career politician, you're not a person who's got a donor network.
Yeah.
You decided to do this for the good of the district and for the contribution you can make and you want to make. So does something like Citizens United hurt the ability of an average citizen? I think you answered it already, but how does it hurt the average citizens being able to participate in this process?
Well, by not being able to, run as many ads, by everything. But in general, yes. I mean, I have the same problem with Democrats, with big companies being in the pockets of Democrats. So fire is an excellent issue for that. Last year in June, there was a bill in the Senate that was brought up in the Senate, and it would have forced insurance companies to pay out 100% of the insured value after a fire, for example. Right now, they only have to pay out 25%. There are some insurance companies that pay out the full amount. Great if you happen to have that insurance. But there's also insurances that just give you 25%. And then for the rest of it, you need to bring receipts, So when you go home, better go home and take photos of all the white t-shirts you have so that you can say, well, they were 5 years old and it probably cost me $50 to replace them. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but that's the truth. Yeah. And in this Democratic-controlled Senate, that bill died in committee. And then we had the car fire up in Shasta, and we had the campfire down here. And, our people, my party, Democrats, didn't stand up for what the people really needed. And we also, fire brings up another thing. Insurances are being dropped left and right in the rural counties. I'm lucky enough, I'm close enough to a fire hydrant, so I don't fear that much that my insurance gets dropped. But we need to come up with a plan to insure the people that have a house there, because they can't even afford to move, because once your fire insurance gets dropped, you don't get, you can't sell the house anymore.
Well, let me be clear. Let me make sure I can understand what you're saying. What you're saying is that the legislators aren't standing up for what makes sense for the constituents, because they're really looking more out for the insurance companies and their interests rather than consumers. Is that fair to say that you believe that's true?
Well, that was the only way I could read that bill died in committee. So yes.
A lot of lobbyists making those meetings down there.
Well, it's leaders. Also, the people in San Francisco and LA, they probably don't care as much about wildfires as we are, who are living in between the trees. Though they should. The people in Santa Rosa probably didn't think their houses would burn down because they were on the other side of the freeway, and the fire just came down and destroyed everything.
Well, and I certainly don't see this as the number one issue for Republicans. I don't see them saying, hey, we need to fight the insurance companies. Right. I mean, it's more immigration and very short-term issues. But one of your opponents, the former Assemblyman Brian Dahle in the forum, said that the state of Jefferson is done. It won't happen, or he's done with it, and it won't happen because Republicans brought it up and it got one vote in committee. As a rural Democrat, you actually agree with Republicans on some issues in the forum. I mean, you of course advocate for water storage in the ground as a cheaper way and a more environmental way to store water. But you do think that Sites Reservoir should go forward as planned. There's a lot of stuff with fire and our forests that you agree on. Some other things, but as a rural Democrat. Do you think it's time that the North State Republicans and Democrats work with the Democratic majority to push issues and tell state Democrats when they're wrong? I mean, I guess I said it before, is they're just a no vote. And there doesn't seem to be discussion, or their voice doesn't seem to really push through to the Democratic majority in a way that maybe a rural Democrat who's, follows the rural Democratic caucus platform and says, you're taking all this money from telecom and we're getting zero taxes. Telecom has to pay zero in taxes, but we're not getting any rural broadband. Yeah. So what is the help here? And it's the same in industry after industry of, I guess I take it from a place of our exports up here. Our exports are our water, electricity, and our children. Because we don't have the vocational training like maybe some of the European countries have that can keep our kids here and working. And you definitely spoke about that too, and sort of your husband's trade, and I certainly was like that. I mean, I tried the institution thing, and I ended up falling back on my skill sets, and it's just not for some people. So
that's a lot to unpack. Let me start. Let me start at the very first sentence that you said. Former Assemblyman Brian Daly, he's our current Assemblyman, as is Kevin Kiley, one of the other opponents. So if either of them get elected, fiscally responsible Republicans, that'll trigger yet another special election, which will have to be paid by the counties, by the citizens in our district.
To fill the assembly seat.
To fill the assembly seat.
Right.
I mean, Ted Gaines had an entire, kind of dropped out 2 years into his second election because he thought he'd better go for the Board of Equalization.
Right.
That is just so wrong on so many levels. So we have Republicans drop out, which triggers a big special election. Then we have Republican assemblymen running for that seat, which triggers another special election. So that's a problem I have with the
all
entire
grabbing
process.
for the next ladder run.
Yeah. Where did we go from there? We went to, help me out.
State of Jefferson. And,
State of Jefferson. I mean, I have looked at that also because there is another Democrat on the ballot who's actually a State of Jefferson activist, and he's dropped out everything.
But
he's still on the ballot though. So, there's really only one Democrat, and that's me, the one with the weird name.
That I always mispronounce.
But I see that where the State of Jefferson people are coming from, they are not represented. And they're not represented because the current representatives are shut out of government. So, this district repeats the same mistakes over and over. It elects people that are not representing them. It's one of the poorest districts in the state. And we keep electing people that want everything for businesses and nothing for the people. So, for example, healthcare. I haven't heard a Brian Daly or Kevin Kiley or any of the others say we need access to healthcare and we need it to be affordable. We have Siskiyou County and where I'm from, the whole Tahoe region, where the closest bigger healthcare facilities and many specialists are across state lines. So they're in Oregon and they're in Nevada. Have you heard any of them say, we need to get insurances to pay for things over there. We need to fix the ACA so that it's paid for. So I think people we're always talking about people voting against their interests, but I think specifically the rural voters have been voting against their issues for reasons such as gun rights. I have no problems with guns. I think it's in the federal hands. I think we're good in California. We have some programs we need to support, but I think what we really need in the rural areas is representation, and that's what we don't have right now.
And you mentioned healthcare, which is one. We have a few minutes left here, and I want to make sure we touch on that before we go, because you've talked about this, that healthcare is a universal, basic human right, and I agree with that. I think we agree with that as well. Does that, in your mind, access to that, does that mean a single-payer system? I mean, I've got a theory. I think I may have mentioned, I know we've talked about it, I think I've mentioned on the show. I think that Gavin Newsom really wants to bring a single-payer system to California, use it as a test bed, and then show he can do that, and then look at a presidential run himself, maybe in 2028. Maybe in 2028, a second term, after he terms out in 2026, he terms out, I think, and then run for president. I think he wants to do that. I think that there's a lot of interest in that. What's your feeling on the single-payer system? I mean, do you think it's necessary? You mentioned the ACA. Do you really just think we need to better support the ACA?
I would fully support a single-payer system as long as it fixes issues, or it looks at issues around the borders as well, because we cannot have a system where, so the current ACA plans have a $40,000 deductible if you go out of state. That's just ridiculous. But so I would totally support a single payer system, and I think it would be a great test bed. But I don't necessarily see single payer versus multi-payer at the heart of the issue. What I see at the heart of the issue is cost control. So if we have a single payer system and the cost is still out of whack, that doesn't really help. We need to find a way that it's not, right now we have insurance companies debating with the providers what the cost should be for certain procedures. And that's just crazy. You have nobody on the patient side. You just have on the consumer side. You just have two companies that want to make money that negotiate the prices. And it's not even the doctors. I talk to doctors. My oncologist's office got bought by Stanford. She still makes the same, but Stanford charges me double of what she charged me before. So we need cost control in the system. My husband worked for a company that made medical devices. They would sell stents, the little thingies that go in your arteries. They would sell the exact same stent in the exact same packaging to Europe for $500 and to the US for $3,000. And I'm not, this is numbers, this is real numbers. So it cannot be that the US is paying for R&D for the rest of the world. We cannot have it. We cannot have a system where people die because they can't afford insulin because they're being charged 10 times of that what other countries are being charged. So I fully support single payer. I can also see a future of like a non-for-profit multi-payer system where there's still insurance companies, but we need to control the prices of the big pharma companies and also of the healthcare providers.
Well, that's a big issue. I mean, but it starts really with working together. I mean, it starts with people getting together in a room and beginning to look at these issues and figure out the best way to do it. The problem is there's so many conflicting interests. I mean, you really have a lot of big money and you have a lot of again, interests, especially on the pharma side and on the insurance side that wants to have the system the way it is and continue to raise rates. It's going to be a hard thing to navigate.
It'll be hard, but if we don't try it, we'll never get there. It'll just get worse and worse. And I mean, that's the main reason I'm running. We have to keep on pushing. We have to keep on trying. If we don't try and just say, it is what it is and live with it, that's not helping anybody, and it's going to push life expectancy in the US further down. I mean, we're the only developed country in the world where life expectancy fell over the last years.
And it's falling in rural areas.
Yeah, especially.
That's causing us some epidemics, those financial stresses, those opioid epidemics, and all these things. Do we got time for one more question?
Quick one, yeah.
Okay. Further to that issue, Democrats have fear of Republicans too. I mean, I hear from Republicans, hey, the taxes are too high here, the homeless issue's out of control, the housing's out of control. I'm moving. I'm going to Texas. I'm going to
Arizona.
Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Oh, I'm going to Arizona. Yeah. I try to tell them, hey, that's going to be a blue state
pretty soon too.
It's going to be a blue state pretty quick. But I mean, to their issue, I mean, there is some gripe there. I mean, how do you kind of speak to that, and what kind of leadership would you provide if you're in the state senate to speak to those issues?
Yes, they're definitely. I mean, taxes are high and everything costs money, and what I'm proposing in terms of fire resiliency costs money. But I just read something about the Butte fire cleanup. Just the cleanup is costing us $2 billion. So I would much rather put $2 billion towards cleaning up the forest and be proactive rather than having 100 people die and then pay $2 billion just for the cleanup. In terms of revenue, so one of the things when I moved here from Michigan, in Michigan, I lucked out and I ended up buying a house that was $140,000, I think, at the time. And my property tax bill was $4,500. And then I moved to California and we bought a house for $400-something thousand, and my property tax bill was actually lower than the one I had in Michigan. So I think if you look at taxes, we have to look at the entire package. You know, it's not just the income taxes, it's also the taxes we pay on other things. So gas is expensive, yes, but home ownership or home taxes, house taxes, property taxes. Sorry, it's my third language, so sometimes I stumble a little bit. Property taxes are complicated and are out of whack, and I would support a split roll tax as long as it takes out small businesses. So if we can get away from the Prop 13 on large business properties, I think that would be a step in the right direction, and it wouldn't be something that's passed on to the people in California. It would raise our revenue, it would make it much more stable, you know, provided that there's an exclusion for small businesses, that is something that I would very much support.
Great. Well, Silke Pflueger, yes?
Very good,
All
yes.
Right. It took me the whole show to get it, Aaron. I finally got it. Thank you again for joining us. Good luck on March 26th.
Yes,
thank you
again,
very
everyone
much.
out there, March 26th, if you're in the 1st District, State Senate District in California,
yes,
please vote.
And it's a different district than the congressional district.
Yes, slightly different.
Yes.
So, but make sure if you are in the district, make sure to get out and vote on March 26th. Thank you for joining us. It was great to meet you.
Thank you very much, both of you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Very nice.
We'll see you soon. All right, we're going to turn now to a new segment here on NorCal News Now, Union Spotlight. And this is where we're going to talk about labor unions and their efforts to support workers. Aaron, now you're a labor guy. So why don't you quickly tell us what this new segment on the show is going to be all about, what we're going to be doing in upcoming episodes.
I figure, the next couple of years, there's going to be a huge swelling. I mean, I think there's a big ground swelling right now for unions, for workplace issues and the need to be able to negotiate things, whether it's $15 an hour, wages across the country and better wages for folks. But, back 4 years ago, Wisconsin started with some protocols with union. A recent Supreme Court decision of Janus that stripped some union things. But what you're seeing in the unions is haven't lost a lot of membership from that. The membership still stays healthy. I think the union I'm in, SEIU, only lost 2% of its laborers from that decision. So there's still a huge support for that, and people obviously in workplace still understand that they need those rights and they need that ability.
But with that said, over the course of decades, slowly we have seen the percentage of U.S. Workers be members of
Absolutely.
unions.
We used to be a large percentage of this country was union. Now it's gotten down to, and I'm not sure the actual numbers, and that's why we want to do this. We want to bring on guests to show and highlight what's going on in the country with this and what's happening. There's been some pros and some negatives. There's bills coming forward every day that want to strip protections for unions, but then there is a groundswelling of support, and you see it all over the country in the last 2 years, Mike. Teacher strikes, and not only in California, but all across the country. We've seen nurses and home health care workers. It's a huge thing, and when you see these groups and these unions work together, something like the Central Labor Council, where it's made up of teachers and nurses and labor people all together, you're starting to see that swelling coming up of saying, you guys have been in leadership, have been protecting this business and then that thing, and we're the workers here, and we're wanting some of our issues taken care of too. The strikes from the teachers have been a powerful thing across this country, and I think that, I saw this great thing the other day. It said, my son's living paycheck to paycheck, and the other guy says, well, tell him to get an education. Well, he's a teacher.
Yeah, right. I mean,
so it's a great highlight to that point. But I think we want to bring on guests locally and through statewide that are in labor leader positions or are in unions and talk about their issues and give them an opportunity to come on and have a platform.
platform to speak about what's going on with their certain union, their certain fields.
Yeah, and I mean, we should note, I mean, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, I mean, things like the 40-hour work week, the 5-day week, weekends. I mean, you know, the minimum wage. I mean, things that you know, all that benefit really everybody who works for a living, really were fought for over the course of time by unions. So it's not a coincidence that we're seeing I think the erosion of buying power for the average working man and woman in the country ties back pretty closely to that erosion of membership in unions and the strength of unions in the government and capital interest. Not that I'm some big socialist, but capital interest eating away at those rights.
And you've seen, well, from a union standpoint, of the faith of both parties has really left. You know, obviously we can say that maybe the Democratic Party is a little more in line with the unions and union cultures. But to say that all union members are with the Democrats is false. I think they've been pulling away from that and kind of going to more of a middle ground to say that, hey, I don't think either side is with us. Right. And in that same vein, I think they're looking and when we talk about teachers and firefighters, I think we're now stepping back and looking at it as say, they've been trying to divide us all. And I think unions have now looked at each other and said, you know what, this isn't going to happen. We're gonna come together, and we're going to, you know, as we do in nature, we're going to join together as we do and say, you know what, those tax cuts, there's great threats with the workforce right now, Mike. Mm-hmm. Automation, yep. These tax cuts that have gone to these corporations, a lot of that money has gone to, well, how can we automate things and get rid of these workers? Mm-hmm. And we're seeing in retail, but we're seeing in robotics that in automated driving, millions of jobs could be lost. And I think unions have a right to stand up and say, we need to do this in the future, and we need to have leaders that watch where it goes to protect jobs and to make sure that businesses can take advantage of automation, but not at the expense of American workers. Got it.
Well, that's what the segment's going to be about. Union Spotlight. We're going to have some really interesting guests coming on. It'll be a segment at the end of the show each week, each time we do an episode of NorCal News Now. So keep an eye out for that. And we'll do it on the upcoming episodes. It'll be fun.
Yeah. We'll get a history of labor, what's going on currently, what needs to happen. I think it's going to be a great segment.
Be good. So check in for that. All right. Well, that's our show. Before we go, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the Butte Glen Central Labor Council, who promotes social justice for working people in our community. So to learn more, visit online at northstatelabor.org. That's the website, I believe, Aaron, northstatelabor.org. And don't forget, NorCal News Now is available wherever you download your podcast. So check us out and subscribe, please. Also, be sure to like us on Facebook or subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So thanks to all of you for listening in and joining us today. Thanks again to Silke Pflueger. Silke Pflueger for joining us earlier on the show as well. She's running on March 26th, so check that out if you're in State Senate District 1. All right, we'll be back at you soon with another big episode of NorCal News Now.
Okay, thanks for watching. So long.